Okay, Chair, we're ready to start.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Economy and Resources Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 20th of January. Today we'll be taking an in-depth look at each individual Scrutiny Committee's midterm financial plan report from their special meetings held within the last month. The format, I will introduce chairs to talk to their reports, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions of them, as well as officers, which will be Elizabeth Davidson, and also Councillor Durham is on the call, and I'm sure he'll want to stick his hand up every so often. And from these questions, we'll formulate our own comments from this committee to go to Cabinet. Obviously, because we're virtual, we can't make any recommendations in an official sense. And just again, hello? Okay. In terms of questions, again, as I said in the last meeting, once you have the floor, you can ask questions until you finish. You don't have to come back to me. Okay. So we'll start by taking introductions and attendance at the meeting. And Shirley, I'm going to ask if you could do this one because I know there's quite a lot of people in and out that I'm completely confused. So I'll let you take that one.
No problem then. So obviously you've got yourself here, Councillor Renton. Councillor Barch.
Here.
Thanks. Councillor Boddy.
Here.
I've got apologies from Councillor Cruddas, and Councillor Willis, I think, is going to do the CYP presentation for us. Councillor Harker.
Yep, I'm here.
Councillor Linda Hughes.
Here.
Doris Jones.
Here.
McEwen.
Here.
Apologies from Councillor Paley, and don't think Councillor Wright is in the meeting as yet. And then we've also got Councillor. Oh, you're there. Morning. Councillor Durham.
Good morning.
And Councillor Marshall.
Hi, I'm.
Yeah, and I've just said we've got Councillor Willis in and Councillor Tate as well, who will do the communities presentation.
So I was just looking down the list. This was where the confusion was. Who will be presenting the adults report? Councillor Donoghue and Councillor meeting at the moment.
Councillor Donoghue's not in the call at the moment.
Cross-engaged.
Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, can I ask if people could put their mics on mute, please, because we're getting some background noise. Thank you. If they're not speaking.
Good call.
Sorry.
Thank you. And health and housing. Do we have anyone from health and housing who'll be talking to the report? No. Okay. Well, we'll get moving and see if anyone pops in by the time we get there. So, do we have any declarations of interest? I can't see any hands. So we'll move on to the midterm financial plan, and this is to consider response to Cabinet on the plan, taking into account the views of all of this Council's scrutiny committees. We'll start with the adult scrutiny committee, or is it worth? I might skip through to my own scrutiny committee to start with, so that we can give anyone else apologies, anyone else time to come through if they're going to join the meeting. Sorry. So, the Economy and Resourcing Scrutiny Committee was held on Thursday, the 6th of January. As well as everyone will have read the report, we discussed, or Elizabeth Davidson gave us an outline of the Council's position and the status of the midterm financial plan. As a committee, we discussed the new homes bonus, the financial settlement, and inequality of the percentages of council tax rise, and we came out with three comprehensive comments to put through to this committee. And those three comments were that the leader and the cabinet member for resources should continue to lobby the government in relation to the need for increasing funding, that cabinet should ensure work is undertaken to the plan for the projected budget deficit over the 4-year period of the MTFP, including details of what steps and actions might need to be taken, and a comprehensive communication strategy should be developed to better inform residents of the borough of this reasons for the a proposed increase in council tax and how the funding is being spent to deliver these services. I think those comments kind of cover all the committees, I think. So what I'll do now is I'll open up to questions, whether you want to ask me questions, Elizabeth Davidson's questions, just fire away if you've got any questions, and then we'll move on to the next report. I can't see anyone, but Councillor Harker looks like he's looking for the hands button potentially.
No, I was just supposing it's a bit navel gazing, asking ourselves about questions we raised at the previous committee.
Yeah.
I presume in terms of the recommendations that we will come back to that at the end in terms of what we recommend as a whole.
Correct. Yeah. Okay, so no questions or discussion on that committee's report. We'll go to communities next with Councillor Tate, as we still don't have anyone from adults or health in the room, I'm afraid. So Councillor Tate, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Community and Local Services Scrutiny Committee met on Thursday, the 6th of January 2022. In regards to the recommendations against the MTFP for 2022 right through to 2026, that there was no recommendations from this scrutiny or no comments to be made on the MTFP.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you. Now I'll open up to questions and discussion on that report. Hands up if you have any. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Chair. Now I've got the microphone on. Just in relation to the paragraph on the page 10, I think it is, in our report that refers to the agricultural team. Question asked, it appears about staffing levels, etc., etc. Is my understanding of the paragraph that it was said that positions would be recruited into and that there would be additional arboricultural officers, or just that there was the potential to do that?
Who wants? Elizabeth, do you want to take a question, or is that okay?
Sorry, I can't recall that. Was it something that Ian Thompson was discussing in the committees? There's no the budget as it is. I think there was a budget for a member of staff. I think the issue was that we hadn't been able to recruit to the post. The money's there. It was the fact that we were going through the recruitment process. I'm not aware, I'm afraid, whether we have recruited to that or not, but I can certainly find out from Ian Thompson if that post has been recruited to.
But presumably, if we haven't, it's not for want of trying, and that we will continue to try.
Yes.
But it would be useful to know if we have managed to find someone, because it is an issue that gets raised endlessly by residents in terms of the local authorities' inability to respond as quickly as residents would like us to.
It's not a problem. I'll find out for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Councillor Body, sorry, Councillor Renton.
It's more of a comment, really. I think the advert as it appeared on the website had the salary there, and some people in the private sector who work as tree surgeons were pointing out that the salary might be the issue because it was rather low.
Okay. Okay, do we have any further comments or questions or discussion on that report? No? Okay, thank you, Councillor Tate. Then now we'll move on to children and young people. I think Councillor Willis. Oh, sorry, apologies there, Elizabeth.
Thanks. I'm just wondering, I know in Councillor Tate's committee that also the Strong Communities Fund was discussed as well. And I think, was it fair to say, Councillor Tate, that the committee was in favour of carrying on with that fund for the future year, because that isn't in the MTFP at the moment. So if there's a recommendation, excuse me, that should continue on, it would be maybe good if this committee passed that through to Cabinet as well.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out, Elizabeth. Yes, it's included at the end of the report as a separate item. So the Stronger Community Fund, it was noted that the Committee for Economy for Communities and Local Services recommended that that does follow into the new financial year.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I was going to jump back to that at the end, but now if we're on it now, I'll just ask a couple of questions on that. Potentially to you, Councillor Tate. I can't see where it says how much of the money had been spent. It just notes that you noted how much was spent of that 50k. Was it something like 13,000 or something? It's just not.
I think it was between 11 and 13,000 had been spent to date, but that was to date when the report was written by the Democratic team. So I imagine that's probably increased now as well after reviewing it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know the exact figure unless Shirley does off the top of her head.
I don't know the off the top of my head, Chair, but I can get that figure to you and see if there's been any updates since that report was written. We can get that information to members.
Thank you.
Okay, and the second question is just slightly unclear in paragraph 5. It says advise that members that the 1k should be spent before the end of the financial year, and that any funding not spent by members may be carried forward to the next financial year. However, members' individual budget would remain at 1k. I assume what you're saying is that they'll top up up to 1k with what's remaining of their previous balance. But
that's correct. The discussion that we had at our meeting was that if members on the 31st of March had £800 left in theirs unallocated, then it would be topped back up to 1,000. So nobody's would ever increase past £1,000. You would always have £1,000 in your kitty to spend within the financial year, but if you don't spend it for whatever reason, then it's only topped back up to 1,000. So there was a discussion around some members felt like they had, because of COVID and different things that had gone on, they weren't in a position to allocate theirs. But what we said is it's best to allocate it and move it from your account to their account, then they can spend it when they need to, because then they've been allocated the funds, and then when it comes to the new financial year, you would then be topped up again.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the same paragraph. I was going to ask that very question, but having had the answer to that, a further question arises in my mind. Thinking back to the original November deadline that we were given in terms of feeding back to Democratic, it was a bit fuzzy about what counted at that point in time as spent, and I think to a large extent it was just the intent that we'd found someone that wanted to take the money, even if we hadn't actually physically given them the money. I think it does need to be crystal clear for the end of the financial year what we mean by spent, because there was confusion before about whether it was just a promise that someone wanted the money. Does it mean we've handed the money over? Does it mean that person themselves have to have spent it? And I don't mind what the answer is. I'm just saying that it needs to be crystal clear what members are being asked to do, so that no one loses money simply because they've misunderstood, rather than that they haven't been bothered to do anything about it. But that's probably for somewhere else to be deliberated. Thanks, Chair.
Just to reply to that one, in the conversation that we had at my Scrutiny Committee with the responsible portfolio holder, it was quite clear that the money needed to have left the credit union account, which is opened in councillor's name, to the group or charity or organisation where you were distributing the money to. So if it's sat in your account on the 31st of March, the end of the financial year, then you'll only get topped back up to £1,000. Therefore, if it's sat in your account, it hasn't then been spent or used.
Okay, if that's what it is,
discussion that we had.
That will be clear. I think before, when this was discussed earlier in the financial year, I'm sure we were told that the money would need to have been spent by the organisation by the end of the financial year. Because I think the point was made was that we could give some money, in November, but they wouldn't need it if it was to do something in the spring. and that was fine. But I'm sure we were told they would have to have spent, the organisation would have had to have spent the money by the end of the financial year. So are we now not saying that, just so that we're clear about?
Yeah, just to be clear, as a council or an organisation or the credit union, they wouldn't be aware if that organisation or group of people have spent that money. The only tracking that's in place is the account that's created in your name as a councillor with the credit union. So if £200 has left your account with the credit union, in effect, to us, that looks like that's been used and spent. Whether that's been passed on to a third party, which would be your charity group or local charity, we wouldn't know whether they've spent that or not, because there's no tracking in place for that. So the conversation that we had on the 6th of January made it quite clear that it's about it leaving your account. So if there's been any confusion previously, my understanding through the discussions we had in the committee, it's that it needed to have left your account allocated by a councillor to the group that you've chosen to support. And that's how it would be tracked.
Right, thanks, that's clear.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So unless we have any further comments or questions, the only comment from that... Oh, Councillor McEwen.
Well, just to add to the discussion, I presume part of the tracking, and I don't think it wouldn't pass a financial audit test, but part of the tracking is a requirement by us as councillors to do a report back of some form, which will gauge impact, which I think is sensible.
Yeah. Well, this is a new thing that we've done as a council, the allocation of £50,000 to 50 councillors. We've already done a report once, and it's come to the Communities and Local Scrutiny Committee. So the Democratic team, once a councillor's allocated their money, feeds back to Shirley and says, actually, this is where I allocated mine. That's added to a report, and then that can be looked at by any of us, really. Shirley's compiling that, and it's already been to my Scrutiny Committee once to be looked at.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
For clarity, in the agreement, as I understand it, I haven't got it in front of me, there's a requirement for us as councillors to produce a report, and I'd look to Shirley. I haven't got a problem with that. And Elizabeth, is that correct, Shirley? If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Thanks, Chair. I think the report does refer to a report back, but I think the intention of that, and I wasn't the author of the original report, was that we did get some feedback from members. The Excel spreadsheet that members fill in does give us information about what the beneficiary is and where the money's been spent. And I think in that context, that's probably the only information that you would get to include in a more detailed report. Now, I have got that spreadsheet. If everybody wants to have a copy of that spreadsheet of where the money has been allocated to date, I can quite happily circulate that outside of the meeting.
Okay, and well, okay. If I could come back one final time, Chair. I mean, I'm okay with that. I just needed to know either way, because I was ready to write with some narrative. I gave £250 to the Silver Jubilee, Platinum Jubilee. I do apologise. Silver Jubilee, that was 1977. The Platinum Jubilee committee on Horton Green, and they will do A, B, and C. But if we're saying that we're just providing numbers and name of organisation, okay.
Yep. Sorry, Chair. The spreadsheet does include what the money's being used for as well. So we'll include that in there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. So the only recommendation from that committee would be to continue the community fund with ongoing tracking. What word would I say there? Evaluation.
Yeah, I think the reporting that's in place from the Democratic team does give a detailed explanation of where the money's being allocated and what it would be used for. I don't think it's needed that all 50 councillors do a separate report to be fed back into it. I just think that the spreadsheet that Shirley's put together and requests that councillors use when they allocate the money is just sent back to her, and Shirley compiles that in a one report rather than having 50 come together.
Is that an ongoing document?
It's a live document that Shirley updates every time a councillor allocates some money.
Okay. Councillor Harker?
Thank you, Chair. Same topic, but different question. I know when the scheme was set up, there was a lot of discussion about the process in terms of, for example, using the credit union and how all that works. And I know Shirley was certainly asking me about feedback I was getting from my members about how it works. Will there be a report, not from the budget perspective, but is that being looked at separately in terms of how we manage handling the money?
A comment from myself is, obviously I've been through the same experience of having to set up the account with the credit union. I think once the account's been set up, it's probably going to be a lot easier to administer in the future. You won't need to go through that same process of setting it up every year. Nothing further to add from myself unless you have, Shirley.
Thanks, Chair. I've got nothing else to add to this one, but obviously it was the first year that we've done it, and we have kind of learnt lessons and going forward that we will pick up for next year. And I have got some feedback from members which we can take into account in deciding how it's going to be administered next year.
Councillor Harker, was it problems in the initial setup, or was it ongoing issues?
I think some of it was, and I take Stephen's point that now that's done. I think some members from recollection had problems in terms of transferring the money, and I think that was just possibly, it was a bit unclear what they needed to do. I think in the end it is relatively easy, and I guess there was another. I think there was, and I think there's just probably lack of clarity or members not listening at times. There was a bit of an uncertainty about what the mechanism was for feeding back to Shirley, because I know a number of members, and I suspect from various parties, were thinking that the credit union was doing that rather than it was down to members to let Shirley know the details of it. So it was a whole raft of not huge issues, but bits and pieces that you'd expect with any new system being set up. And as I said, I was aware that Shirley was monitoring feedback from members, and hence it was just a genuine question about whether any of the processing side of it would change next year. But as I said, that's not really a discussion today, but as it was on the agenda, I raised it.
Did you have a response, Shirley? Will there be feedback in terms of the process? Or
I will look at the process and look at how it's operated and whether or not we can actually make it clearer. I suspect the process will stay the same. It might be just communication that we need to get a little bit clearer to members. So yeah, I will pick that up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tate.
Thank you.
Now we will move on to children's. Am I right in thinking Councillor Willis is going to take?
Hi everyone. So Children and Young People's met on the 10th of January, and the main recommendation to come out of that was about early help. The members were all agreed that, after speaking with the Assistant Director there, that if more funds could go anywhere within Children's and Young People's, early help would be the best place to put that. Effectively, if you put early help in, it could prevent a lot of spending and also a lot of intrusive interventions later on down the line, and save money then. So it may require a bit of extra funding now, but it could save far greater funds further on in time. It is effectively the old stitching time saves nine mantra.
Okay.
And that was the one recommendation that came out of the report there. So.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have any questions or anything to discuss on that report? Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Chair. From recollection on that budget, and I think it was briefly discussed in the committee itself, but I can't remember, there was a line entry in terms of a reduction to children's services of £250,000. And I understand there was a typographical error in that it relates to adults and children's, not just children's. And I just wondered what the comment was in terms of where those savings were coming from, because £250,000 is a large amount of money to be taking out of, and it is now 2 budget lines. But it is 2 of the services that are probably the most crucial things that we do as a local authority. And I'm not sure from the minutes whether that was discussed at the committee.
Elizabeth?
Thank you. Brett would have a much better answer for this, but it was discussed in the committee and it was discussed in the adults committee as well. And it's all around lots of different staffing areas. And because there's quite a high turnover, a lot of it, because staff are on 4-point scales, if somebody leaves, the new member of staff goes onto the bottom of the scale. There was also people who were joining who weren't joining the pension scheme as well. So there wasn't a reduction in staff. It was an amalgamation of a number of turnover issues across adults, and I think it was more adults than children's services. So that was the reason why it wasn't taking staff numbers out. In fact, staff numbers, I believe, were actually increased.
Is it possible to get the detail of that?
I'm sure, yes, I'm sure it'll be there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? No, so we just have the one recommendation from that committee. We will move on to, we'll go for health and housing next. And I'll just check the attendance. I don't think there's anyone who will speak to the report, so I'll give it a quick summary. So the committee met on Wednesday, the 5th of January. They had the usual introduction from Elizabeth. And in terms of the discussion, obviously it's a statutory service. The public health grant allocation had not been yet announced, and there were no specific pressures for housing or public health in 2022-23. And in terms of comments, there were no comments or recommendations from the committee. So we can open it up for a discussion. Questions might not be possible, but we'll see what we can do if anyone has any comments or would like to contribute. Council body.
It's just a question for Elizabeth, really. Did I get I'm sure I got an email from you detailing how many properties that have been brought back into use in the council area, properties that weren't that previously hadn't been in use or fallen into disuse and were brought back into use. Did I get some figures from you in relation to that? Your microphone's on mute.
Yes, you did. I did send you some information, Councillor Body. Yes, it was. I think with regard to that. Yeah, it's not a problem.
That was that it. No comment. Okay. Any further comments?
Well, obviously, it's a potential source of income for the local authority, and it is important if we're going to be getting a grant of 4,000 per property, obviously.
Okay. Any further discussion on that report? No? Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to the Adult Scrutiny Committee, which met on Tuesday, the 21st of December. Again, Elizabeth gave us the introduction and we discussed the statutory nature of the majority of adults' social care services and funding allocation. Discussed encouraging the harnessing of underutilised council assets and also looking to focus on honing services via the transformation agenda. The committee accepted the draft as proposed, particularly in relation to those services and finances within the remit of the committee, and undertake work throughout the forthcoming year to inform the MTFP. There were no comments or recommendations. Okay, do we have any questions, comments on that report? No? Right, okay, so I think that's all of the reports. So now we'll enter into discussion on what we as a scrutiny committee put forward as a final set of comments. I don't think we can do recommendations to the Cabinet. So at the moment we have 3 recommendations from Economy and Resources, which are, and I'll read them out again, just so we have them on, so fresh in our minds. So the leader and the Cabinet member for Resources should continue to lobby the government in relation to the need for increased funding. Cabinet should ensure work is undertaken to plan the projected budget deficit over the 4-year period of the MTFP, including details of what steps and actions might need to be taken, and a comprehensive communication strategy should be developed to better inform residents of the borough of the reasons for the proposed increase in council tax and how the funding is being spent to deliver services. We then have 1 recommendation from Communities and Local Services, which is that we continue the Strong Communities Fund with ongoing reporting. And then finally, we have 1 from Children and Young People, which is that if any additional funding should be aimed at early help. So I'm not reading it out verbatim because I've got masses of papers in my hands. So do we have any questions or comments on those 5 comments to be put through to Cabinet? Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Mike. In relation to the recommendations from our own committee, I'm just wondering if we need to, on the little 1 and little 2, make some amendments to it. Little 2, more easily explained. Do we need to add something into Cabinet feeding back to the wider council in terms of the work that they're undertaking?
What would the wording be? Just reading that sentence. So, plan for project deficit over the 4-year period, detailed steps of what action might be taken, and potentially report back to this committee. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, and I'm sort of struggling to think what would be a sensible timescale. 6 months, I don't know.
Councillor Durham, do you want to come in on this?
Councillor Renton. I think I wouldn't like to drive the decision that's made by this committee. I think if you make a proposal and then we need to consider it as Cabinet.
Councillor Harker,
Well, 6 months.
6 months.
And if anyone else has got a different view, perhaps Elizabeth does.
Can I, Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah. Being realistic, I don't think 6 months is achievable. We won't even have had our first budget monitoring report back in that period because this is from February onwards. There's a number of things happening this year. The government have said that they will be looking at the resources review for the whole of local government, and I think that's a key pinnacle point that we would need to know. Obviously, finance officers will be spending lots of times with regard to feeding in and negotiating and putting our points forward as a local authority to the government, and obviously lobby for as much funding as we can. I also know that it was certainly adult scrutiny, and I believe it was children's as well, said that they want to do some detailed work on their areas in particular, because obviously that's 3/4 of our budget, adults and children's services. So I think it would be preemptive for any work to be done before the results of that and that deep dive had happened as well. But that's just my opinion as an officer. Obviously, I just think August is not realistic for us to have done from an officer point of view, a significant amount of work on this. Thank you.
I mean, I'm happy to take a suggestion on this. It just struck me that as it stands, they might do some work, and us having requested that it be done, we then don't hear anything back about it. So, you know, I think raising an element of politics in the question, I think whilst we are expecting reviews to take place, given what's been happening nationally in the last few days, there is a potential for change of leadership in terms of our Prime Minister, which may result in a change of view about the country's finances. And it is possible that that review then may either not take place, or the manner in which it fleshes out may be very different to what we might have been expecting, say, in the last month in terms of the current government. So, you know, arguably, we're in less of a certain situation than we were when I raised the question when we had our own Scrutiny Committee meeting a week or so ago. So I think it's a necessary piece of work that needs to be done, but I accept Elizabeth's point about what's a sensible timescale.
Okay, Council Body.
Can we set the date for the work to be done then in early September then, under the circumstances following Elizabeth's recommendation?
Isn't that like a couple of weeks later? Only
well, yes, August, September, yes, whatever. Give yourself a little bit of a margin, yeah.
Councillor Durham, you put your hand up there. I'm not.
Yeah, I think it was obviously Councillor Harker just obviously emphasised, you know, it's a continually moving piece, and there will be a lot of water that flows under the bridge over the next few years. Now, obviously, I can't steer your Scrutiny Committee, but what I will just say is that obviously what you don't want to do is you don't want to put a lot of resource and effort into a piece of work while you've continually got a moving landscape. I think, you know, if I make a political comment, as and when a situation crystallises, you know, then there will be a comprehensive deep dive, focused and pushed from resources, you know, in terms of any other separate Scrutiny Committee, if they want to do their own separate look into the detail, shall I say, of where the money's spent at this moment in time, then that's up to them. But obviously, as I said before, in terms of Cabinet, we will take on board the comments and obviously discuss that in the next Cabinet meeting.
Councillor Hughes?
Well, in light of the fact it's a 4-year NTFP, can we just put in 12 months? Would that help? I'm conscious if we don't put something on it, it doesn't come back to the committee, and we miss something. I think it's, if we're asking for something to be done, it should be time bound as well. There needs to be some sort of timing on there. Otherwise, nothing. It may happen, it may not happen. But by putting a time on it, ensures that something will happen.
Good point. Thank you, Council Body. No, you're off now. You're on.
Yes, yes, I'd agree with that.
Councillor Harker?
Yeah, that's fine. I suspect we don't really know what the answer is, but that's the situation we're in at the moment. So, yeah, and the more the point was about it having some form of endpoint for feedback was really what I was raising.
Yeah.
And the second point I was going to raise, if I may, Chair, on our own recommendations was the little one where we're asking Leader and Cabinet to raise the issue with government. I think perhaps what we should have done in the first instance is to make the point that there are two sort of separate issues. One is, and we talked about this, the balance of council revenue that is now council tax. That is one issue. And separately, the reliance on having a specific levy for adult social care, because one's very much about the whole nature of how local government is funded, and the second one is about, in my view, an admission from government that it's so woefully underfunded that, in particular, adult social care is really, really struggling. And if a reliance on local taxation is going to be there for the long term, that's going to exacerbate the issues that people are going to be facing this year in terms of escalating bills across the whole raft of things that we all pay for. So I think we need to be clear in our recommendation that it's two separate issues that we're lobbying in. One's about funding as a whole, as I said, and separately that this issue about the additional levy for adult social care needs bottoming out.
Okay. Council Body.
I'd also just like to add, if I may, in anticipation that a central government review of finances recommends an extension of the New Homes Grant that also gives us a grant for bringing old derelict properties back into use as homes. I'd recommend that we continue that work in bringing derelict, semi-derelict, abandoned properties back into use.
So just a comment to say, continue the work. Yeah.
I think it needs flagging up, yeah.
Councillor McEwen.
Can I just make a comment, and I'm not being pedantic. Having had a little knowledge is dangerous, but having had some experience from our work perspective in terms of capital works, whilst it's good to bring redundant buildings back into play, sometimes it may be more cost effective to build new. And I'm, so I think we need something, and I'm not being pedantic. I think from a stewardship of financial funds, we need to say where possible. Hopefully that makes sense.
Hopefully. Okay, so we have 4 recommendations there. 2 of them have had slight edit on those, and one new one in terms of continuing the empty property review where possible. Is the committee? Oh, I have a hand there. Hold on, I've just spotted a hand. Oh, it's Councillor McEwen. Unless is that a legacy hand?
A legacy hand, Chair. I do apologise.
No problem. So, unless we have anyone in disagreement, those would be the 4 that we put forward from this individual committee. Does anyone have any problem with any of those recommendations? Put your hands up now. Comments, possibly not recommendations. Okay, so I'll propose those 4 from this. In fact, no, I'll wait for that proposing. We'll go to the other 2 first, and then we'll just do them all together. So, communities and local services, the community fund to continue. That was the only recommendation. And unless there's any comments or further comments on that, the final comment would be that any additional funding in children's be aimed at early help. So I will now propose those 6 comments to be put forward from this committee. I'll work with Shirley to ensure that the wording of those are sufficient, and I'll also work with I'll pass it on to other councillors to make sure they're happy with that. But Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the Stronger Communities Fund, I'm not quite sure whether this sits within this budget cycle process or whether there'll be a separate report about that fund that will go to Cabinet and CLS in terms of whether there'll be a discussion about the benefits and disbenefits of it as a scheme, rather than just it rolling forward with no thought about whether it's achieving what we set out to achieve with it. And I don't know whether I said that sits here as part of this budget cycle or whether it'll be looked at through Cabinet and CLS scrutiny separately.
I think there was quite a lot of discussion in terms of the value of it in community scrutiny, wasn't there, Councillor Tate?
Yeah, just for any councillors that haven't seen the report.
Oh, your microphone.
just for any councillors that haven't seen the report itself, it was included in the pack for my scrutiny committee, so it is there for members to read if they want to, or Shirley will redistribute an up-to-date one. But there wasn't any projects on there that I didn't think were adding value to local communities. As councillors, it's within your gift to use it how you see fit. The rules are quite relaxed around it. But I know the projects that I've allocated my own funding to are giving real benefit to grassroots local projects on your doorstep, really. And especially coming out of COVID, a lot of the groups and little community groups that have created to bring people back together to tackle things like isolation and mental health and things like that, I think they are adding real benefit. That's my only comments, but that was discussed at the committee as well.
Will you be doing a full year discussion on the fund, Councillor Tate?
So it was agreed that we would pick up the fund and review it after 6 months. So we will continue to review it every 6 months within Communities and Local Services Committee. It'll be on the work programme.
Okay,
so that'll give halfway through the year and then a yearly review.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so that sort of answers the question. As long as it's being discussed somewhere, that's what I was getting at, rather than just sort of nodding, rolling it forward without much thought about what the benefits, etc., etc. So yeah, that's fine then. Thank you.
So I'll propose those 6 comments. Can I have a seconder from the committee? Councillor Lucky, you've got your hand up. Can I count that as a seconder? Or you're on mute.
So it was a lazy hand, but given it was up, yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. And quick show of hands. I've got my hand up, and I think that is now a majority. Whatever that means in virtual terms, I have no idea, but that means we can. I'll work with Shirley to make sure those questions are worded properly, and I will distribute that to the committee just to make sure everyone's happy with the wording of those additional comments. But otherwise, that is everything for the day. Unless I'm missing something, tell me now.
No, Chair, that's fine. That's all we need to do today.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to the chairs who came along to the committee, and thank you, Elizabeth, and cabinet members, and also members. Have a good day.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.